Hey, welcome to Santa Cruzing. Tonight we're going to do some cruising about the hippie movement, the Brotherhood of Eternal Love. But first we want to say some stuff about the California Roots Festival on Memorial Day. We got High Roots is going to be playing there. And we'll show you a little commercial here right now on High Roots in the California Roots Festival, Memorial Day weekend. Hey, Sandy. We could show that clip. Hey.
Yeah! Maybe I should drive home, far from sober. Maybe I should. It's such a sacrifice inside, yeah. Nice to know ya, let's do it again. How we did it on a one night stand. Girl, I wanna be more than a friend to ya. Nice to know ya, let's do it again. How we did it on a one night stand.
Hey now, that's coming up. California Roots Festival. And now this is Santa Cruz and I'm Bobby Bell. You know, it's produced by the Brotherhood of Eternal Love and we're telling our tales and stuff. We got some t-shirts for sale. We're going to be selling for our benevolence, Brotherhood Benevolence Fund for the low, no income brothers and families so they can get their teeth fixed and all the basics of life. So we want you to buy some t-shirts out there. And also, on this show, we've been talking about psychedelics, LSD, and the wonderful world of marijuana and all the good stuff in life and why it's repressed and why all this stuff's happening in our time, why war. There's no reason for war. There's no reason for war anymore. It's like, you know, the only reason it is somebody wants more. And so we're going to, you know, if you want to see BS, go to CBS. If you want to see all BS, go to ABC. If you want to see no news at all, go to CNN. But if you want to see the truth, if you dare the truth, come see me or anybody at Community TV. And dare the truth. Yeah, so we're going to go into some word salad and feed your head tonight. I've been telling you over and over and everybody else that within our pineal gland, we create, in our crystal microids in those halls in there, we create natural DMT, which is a psychedelic substance that is more natural than LSD. But basically that's the Stargate, the third eye, the inner Messiah, the eye on the dollar bill. They don't want you to know about because you're the stuff. You're the God, you're everything at that top of that pyramid, man. Everybody's the same thing. We're all raised from the sun. We're not the sun, but that's a Stargate. You can go anywhere there. Every night you go to sleep, you're tripping, man. You're dreaming. How come? Because you better watch for the brain police. They might come and get you when you're sleeping. Oh, and your kids. Anyway, I'm going to show you a clip here about that. You might like this. Hey now, Sandy, we got that clip in there.
René Descartes referred to the pineal gland as the seat of the soul. It's often referred to as the third eye. It is believed by some to be a dormant organ that can be awakened to enable telepathic communication, or an uplink between this realm and higher realms. Science has recently discovered that the pineal gland is covered with crystalline structures called calcite microcrystals. In his book, The Spirit Molecule, Dr. Rick Strassman states that in addition to melatonin, the pineal gland secretes a psychedelic chemical called DMT. His case studies are loaded with astounding stories of another realm experienced under the influence of the drug. These testimonies include contact with otherworldly beings and locales and knowledge of the underlying unity of all that is. Himmler's Wewelsburg Castle is the point or apex of the actual representation of the Spear of Destiny. From a bird's eye perspective, the entire complex looks very much like the human brain. Stranger still, the Eye of Horus, or the Eye of the Moon, also fits nicely into this map, implying that Horus, Jesus, and all other sun gods were representations of the psychedelic experience, discovered through the DMT pathways in the crystalline-covered hallways of the pineal gland. This is also the eye that you see atop the pyramid on the dollar bill, the one true Stargate and inner Messiah. The magic psilocybin mushroom being the manna or his flesh Catholics so ignorantly take in wafer form at communion.
Responsibility for your God selves out there, and you know, turn on, tune in, and spread the love. Now, the Brotherhood of Eternal Love has been pushing psychedelics and pot since 1966. You can see it in that Orange Sunshine book and a bunch of books, Ed May's Brotherhood, all that. And they're having a movie coming out, Orange Sunshine documentary. And in the meantime, I've been interviewed in that book and the movie and all this stuff and everything. And so far, not one original member of the Brotherhood has been interviewed. The Brotherhood started in 1957 in Anaheim, home of Disneyland at Fremont Junior High School, and went on from there and accumulated all around the world, become the biggest distributors of LSD and marijuana in the world. And we're also selling these T-shirts right here, folks, and for our Brotherhood Benevolent Society, because you know, everybody's taking over all our stuff now and everything, and so we're not gonna, you know, we don't get no money from this for franchises and stuff, and they put us in jail, hounded us, and all that kind of stuff. Hey, we got Afghanis up there. All right, man. Anyway, that's cool, because Afghanistan was one of our places, and I loved the Afghani people, and we had the best time over there. Hayatullah Toki and our friends in Afghanistan, our Afghan connection, until the Russians came in. The Brotherhood was still there, and it's a shame what's going on about all this stuff. But you can go to the brotherhoodofeternallove.org, and there's a T-shirt store there, and you can get these T-shirts. This is the orange one. I like the orange ones too, man. They're real nice. But so we're gonna we told you about MK Ultra, the British Secret Service, you know, based on the opium wars in India and China, where they got the Chinese all strung out a few times on this show, and showed you, you know, and all this information. That was MK Ultra, Operation Artichoke, Operation Bluebird, and then they got all the guys stoned on acid, Leary and Kesey and Crawley, and all those guys were, you know, it was all planned stuff, the Beatles and everything. And then they set us up and then let us run amok, and then after they got the Druid love-ins and all this stuff started, then they stopped all the pot and the psychedelics and brought in the coke and the crack and all that stuff, and then they started busting everybody big time for the pot and everything, and made a big business on all ends of that, and the lawyers, the judges, the prison systems, the whole rotten mess from these people. War's not feasible anymore. There's no reason for it. But we're going to go to this clip now and run down pretty much who the kingpins of the drug wars have been and are, and who's pushing all this stuff. So, hey, you guys, in the meantime, you chill out there and have a good time, stay high, and remember the Brotherhood of Eternal Love, and support your community TV. They're taking our funding away from us, so you guys can all come down here and sign up. And for $25 a month, you can join community TV and say you want to join Santa Cruzan and Spilly Chili and all them people down here and Issues, and become part of the community TV Black Sheep Squadron. Send in your $25 and become a member for a year and help support community TV. There's a lot of stuff, just not my point of view here. There's lots of point of view. But here we're going to this point of view. Damn, this shit's unreal. Word salad, feed your head. Santa Cruzan. I'll talk to you, Catherine.
The American CIA and Pakistan's ISI financed an anti-Soviet group in Afghanistan and provoked a profitable 10-year war with the Russians. When the Russians invaded Afghanistan, the CIA hired Osama bin Laden to recruit and train al-Qaeda fighters to fight the Russian army.
Invasion. Anti-communist guerrillas in Afghanistan have been at the front line in the fight against the spread of communism.
But what was the fight really all about? Not carrots or potatoes. It was about poppies, endless fields of opium poppies that provide over 70% of the world's heroin supply to heroin addicts worldwide.
These are very uncomfortable issues for politicians. It was a dramatic story, but the media failed to tell us the less heroic side of Afghanistan's freedom fighters. America's new friends had become hooked on the economics of the poppy. During the war, many of the mujahideen radically increased the production of opium, the raw ingredient of heroin.
The international drug trade began in 1606 when Queen Elizabeth I built England's wealth by trafficking illegal opium from India to China. British East India Shipping Company and profited handsomely, not just from drug trafficking, but from trafficking African slaves with her slave trader, John Hawkins. First knighted her slave trader with the noble title of Sir John Hawkins. By 1830, the British had distanced themselves from dope dealing by granting opium monopoly rights to the Jewish Sassoon family, who became known as the Rothschilds of the Far East. As an agent for the Crown, David Sassoon shared his dope profits with Queen Victoria.
The British East India Company built a major factory to process the opium here at Gazipur. It's still a lucrative earner for the Indian government, which sells opiates to the world's pharmaceutical industry.
When the Chinese banned opium and destroyed 600 chest loads of the addictive drug, Sassoon and the British retaliated.
It was a financial disaster for the British. With huge profits at stake, they retaliated with the Opium Wars of 1843 and 1858. The forces of the market were to defeat China's moral prohibition.
Sassoon and the British forced drug addiction onto an entire nation, stole the island of Hong Kong, and made Hong Kong the capital of the British international drug trade. In 1872, Queen Victoria knighted David Sassoon's son, Albert Sassoon, who spread the illegal opium trade throughout China and Japan. In 1887, Sir Albert Sassoon married Aline Carolyn Rothschild and joined the pirated fortunes of the Sassoon drug cartel with the Rothschild money cartel. Today, it's business as usual for the descendants of the Sassoon and Rothschild families, who socialize with Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Charles as elite members of Britain's inner power circle. Many have been granted royal titles like Sir, Countess, Baron, and Marquis, but their many victims aren't fooled by the crowns, the titles, and the tuxedos. They have very different titles for them. Titles like liars, thieves, dope dealers, and mass murderers for the crown. On the other side of the Atlantic, a member of the same opium smuggling syndicate, Samuel Russell, founded Yale University's Skull and Bones Brotherhood with drug money. Exclusive members were financed into political power positions in the CIA, the U.S. Supreme Court, and the White House. When Skull and Bonesman George Bush Sr. became CIA director in the 1980s, the CIA recruited Osama bin Laden to train al-Qaeda and Mujahideen fighters in Afghanistan. The job of Osama's trainees was not just to fight the Russian communists, it was to run Afghanistan's multi-billion-dollar opium trade. Heroin, manufactured from Afghan opium, supplied $250 to $300 billion annually to Wall Street and the U.S. banks. Authors Alfred McCoy and Michael Levine tied the CIA to this unholy drug alliance and received national attention when the CIA tried to suppress their books.
Michael Levine became a best-selling author when he wrote about his experience of this unholy alliance. After 30 years' distinguished service with the DEA, he could write with some authority.
You could look at what they did to me as an example in microcosm of Central Intelligence's actions and the State Department in completely subverting the drug war. You know, the drug war was something that only existed in the minds of Americans, on the streets of America, for kids like my brother, for cops who died. There was no drug war. The biggest drug dealers in the world were given a license to sell drugs to Americans to support themselves. And this continued right down from Southeast Asia, through the Mujahideen, through the Contras.
But how was the heroin smuggled into the United States? One of America's most gruesome secrets is that during the Vietnam War, heroin was smuggled into the United States by hiding it inside the body bags of dead American soldiers. By the end of the 1960s, 1/3 of U.S. soldiers in Vietnam and close to 1 million United States citizens were hooked on heroin. Drugs like LSD, mescaline, marijuana, and hashish also swamped the streets and college campuses of America. Who or what turned America's youth onto these illegal drugs? Celebrity anti-war activists like Aldous Huxley, Timothy Leary, Allen Ginsberg, and Bertrand Russell sold America's youth on acid rock, tripping out, and one world government. Their financing came from the Warburg Banksters and IPS, Institute for Policy Studies. Over 100 million doses of LSD that hit the streets of America were purchased by Timothy Leary and Alan Dulles through S.G. Warburg's Sandoz AB Pharmaceutical Company in Switzerland. Free sample-sized packages of acid were handed out not only on college campuses, but at rock concerts, where musicians persuaded millions of fans to get high. Critics of the drug culture blame parents, teachers, law enforcement, and everybody except the people behind it all, namely the Rothschild-Warburg banksters and their Committee of 300. According to Dr. John Coleman, who wrote the story of the Committee of 300, the Beatles rock group were brought to America by the Tavistock Institute. Tavistock launched the drug culture revolution in America to popularize and normalize social drug use. Through their record companies and advertising monopolies, the banksters have packaged and financed their celebrity salesmen to anesthetize, addict, and enslave billions of people worldwide with dependencies on both prescription and non-prescription, legal and illegal drugs. Those drugs range from alcohol, nicotine, and caffeine to Prozac, crack cocaine, and heroin. Like the phony war on terrorism, the phony war on drugs is a cat and mouse game being fought with one hand and fed with the other. The peace symbol adopted by the drug flower children of the 60s was designed by Gerald Holtham, who was commissioned by One World Government salesman Bertrand Russell. The symbol was never designed as a symbol of peace, but as a symbol of death. It is actually a cross turned upside down with the arms broken and is used by Satanists and in Druid witchcraft. In Germany, the symbol is known as the death rune and is found on tombstones of Hitler's Nazi SS officers. CIA's team of ex-Nazis and skull and bonesmen financed and trained Osama bin Laden, who pushed the Russians out of Afghanistan by 1989. The CIA then trained and installed the ruthless Taliban regime to run the booming opium trade. After a decade, the long friendship between America and the Taliban suddenly turned ugly. At a meeting held on December 4th, 1997 at Unocal headquarters, American oil men made a proposal to the Taliban about building a pipeline through Afghanistan. Rothschild Shell Oil and Rockefeller's Exxon Oil had invested billions in the Kazakhstan oil and gas reserves just north of Afghanistan. Now they needed a pipeline to transport it to the Persian Gulf. The Taliban demanded a bigger cut and turned down the proposal. Suddenly, the banksters' American-controlled media were calling the Taliban monsters, evildoers, and cruel villains who beat up on women. On July 4th, 1999, President Clinton froze the Taliban's U.S. assets and bank accounts and imposed trade sanctions on Afghanistan. By February 2001, the Taliban destroyed most of Afghanistan's opium crops. In May, Secretary of State Colin Powell announced a gift of 43 million U.S. taxpayers' dollars to the Taliban. He called it a reward to the Taliban for destroying the opium crops, but members of the new George W. Bush White House knew the Taliban would use the 43 million for more sinister purposes.
The larger issue is not just not connecting the dots, but not getting the dots. Why was it that CIA was unable to collect information for years inside Afghanistan? When they had authority to kill bin Laden for over 2.5 years, why were they unable to kill him or his lieutenants? Why didn't they have a better capability to do something about it at the source?
Could it be that the bankster-supported U.S. administration is controlling both sides of the war on terror? Before the first plane ever even hit the first tower on 9/11, a massive U.S., British, and NATO troop buildup was already organized and positioned for an attack on Israel's enemies, opium-rich Afghanistan and oil-rich Iraq.
And there's an old poster out west, as I recall, that said, "Wanted, dead or alive."
With no solid proof of who was responsible for 9/11, George Bush Jr. attacked the poverty-stricken, war-ravaged country of Afghanistan only 4 weeks after 9/11. The U.S. and British military dropped 12,000 bombs on thousands of buildings and homes, pounding them into dust and rubble and killing 8,000 Afghan people. 20,000 more people died from war-related cold, starvation, and disease. Nobody made a big-budget TV production out of the massacre with a God Bless Afghanistan movie score. The U.S.-British war on Afghanistan left behind millions of starving people and thousands of women who are still veiled, still homeless, and still penniless.
Afghanistan is the world's largest producer of opium and now the world's largest producer of heroin.
دې لب دا ده چې 14 کاله دلته جنګ تیر سوی، زراعت تباه سوی، شفاخانې تباه سوي، تجارت تباه سوی، تعلیمي ادارې تباه سوي، مکتبونه تباه سوي، سرکونه تباه دي، ولږه ده، فقر ده، خلک بله چاره نه لري څه وکړي.
There can never be peace and democracy in Afghanistan. Why? Because peace and democracy would expose and cut off corporate America's opium and heroin trade at the source. So what was the payoff for the U.S.-British war on Afghanistan? 1, the uncooperative Taliban warlords got kicked out and replaced by the cooperative Northern Alliance warlords. 2, opium and heroin production and revenues skyrocketed. 3, Afghanistan got a new leader named Hamid Karzai, who just happens to be an ex-employee of Unocal Oil. 3, America got permission to build their oil and gas pipeline through Afghanistan. And 4, the Bush administration's favorite excuse for war, Osama bin Laden, was allowed to escape. America's second favorite excuse for war, Saddam Hussein, has always been America's patsy. In the 1980s, the United States supported Iraq's invasion of its neighbor, Iran, to stop the spread of Iran's Islamic Revolution. America played both sides of the Iran-Iraq war by supplying Saddam with chemical and biological weapons of mass destruction, and at the same time, America secretly sold weapons to Iran and illegally diverted the money to the Contra-revolutionaries in Central America.
During the war, the United States sent a special envoy to see Saddam in 1983. He was Donald Rumsfeld, now the U.S. Defense Secretary. The two men discussed how to reinforce Iraq against a common enemy. This was at a time when Iraq was using chemical weapons on Iranian troops. U.S. companies were supplying components with Washington's knowledge.
By 1990, President George Bush Sr. tricked Iraq into another war with another oil-rich neighbor, Kuwait. How? By supplying Kuwait with horizontal drills that could reach beneath the border of Iraq and siphon oil from Iraq's oil fields. Kuwait used the U.S.-made drills to steal 300,000 barrels of oil per day from Iraq, worth over $3 billion annually.
The fuse was lit, and Kuwait did nothing to put it out. They pumped oil without restraint from Rumaila oil field, which was accessible to both Kuwait and Iraq, and they exceeded OPEC quotas, flooding the market and driving prices even lower.
George Bush Sr. officially promised not to interfere in Iraq's legitimate oil battle with Kuwait, but when Saddam's army entered Kuwait to defend their oil reserves, Bush pounced on them.
Our goal is not the conquest of Iraq. It is the liberation of Kuwait.
America disposed of its toxic waste problem by building radioactive depleted uranium right into their bombs and dropping them on Iraq. Bush Sr. not only devastated and poisoned Iraq's water systems and infrastructure, he weakened the economies of both Kuwait and Iraq, collected giant profits from rationed Iraqi food for oil programs, and landed massive rebuilding contracts in Kuwait. Bush Sr. followed up the Gulf War with 10 long years of deadly trade sanctions that killed another 1.5 million Iraqi people, including 600,000 children who were cut off from medical supplies.
A bookstore in the United States today, you can find 50 books celebrating different aspects of the war and how grand it all was. And you only find one that points out that this was a war crime, that demonstrates the evidence that shows that we deliberately targeted civilians and killed more than 250,000 people in Iraq.
You'll be fighting not to conquer anybody, but to liberate people.
In March 2003, President George Bush Jr. launched the Second Gulf War. The war on Iraq wasn't about revenge for 9/11, since not one of the 19 accused terrorists were Iraqi citizens. It wasn't about weapons of mass destruction, which inspectors hadn't found. It wasn't even about Saddam Hussein, who had been financed into power by the U.S. in the first place and who got his chemical and biological weapons from American companies. No, the U.S. wars against Iraq and against Afghanistan were about mass murder and piracy. They were about big weapons sales, big oil, big pipelines, big drugs, and big rebuilding contracts. They were about colonizing the Middle East and moving 2 giant steps closer to world domination.
Clear the house now. Let's sweep on down
straight. You go. أنا أروح أشتريها ب6 أنفار. أنا ما أريد هاي الحرية، ما أريد هاي الديمقراطية، وأخويا وأطفاله راحوا من عندي، وهذا اللي ترونه ها من الدماء والجروح واللي الدمار اللي
الأمريكيين هذول الحواوين القنادل.
The theft and devastation of this ancient land by the U.S. government closely resembles the theft and devastation of Palestine by the Israeli government.
Showed the POWs and the dead soldiers. Al Jazeera showed them. It was powerful because America doesn't show those kind of images. Most of the news in America will show really gory images, and this showed American soldiers in uniform strewn about a floor, a cold tile floor, and it was revolting. It was absolutely revolting. It made me sick at my stomach. And then what hit me was the night before there had been some kind of bombing in Basra, and Al Jazeera had shown images of the people, and they were equally, if not more horrifying than images were. And I remember having seen it in the Al Jazeera office and thought to myself, wow, that's gross. That's bad. And then going away and probably eating dinner or something, and you know, it didn't affect me as much. So the impact that had on me realizing that I just saw people on the other side, and those people in the Al Jazeera office must have felt the way I was feeling that night, and it upset me on a profound level that I wasn't as bothered as much the night before. It makes me hate war.
Tougher every day.
Some soldiers are even taking aim at their leaders. One told ABC News, if Donald Rumsfeld was here, I'd ask him for his resignation. Another suggested the deck of playing cards displaying wanted Iraqi commanders should be revised. The aces in my deck, he said, include Donald Rumsfeld and George Bush.
Since 1995, the General Accounting Office has ranked the Defense Department's financial management among the worst in the federal government on the GAO's list of high-risk areas vulnerable to waste, fraud, abuse, and mismanagement. What's more, in fiscal year 2000, the Defense Department's own Inspector General found the Pentagon could not account for more than $1 trillion, trillion with a T.
Private First Class Lindy England may never have figured these images would beam into the homes of millions of horrified people. Whatever she might have thought at the time, she says she and her comrades had no choice.
So to stand there, give a thumbs up, smile, stand behind all the naked Iraqis in the pyramid, take a picture.
Who told you to do that?
Persons in my higher chain of command.
Why were naked Muslim prisoners positioned on top of each other in the shape of an Egyptian pyramid? The answer can be found in the distant past. In ancient times, Iraq was called Babylon.
The year is 586 BC. The armies of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, descend on Jerusalem with the wrath of an angry God. It is almost 6 centuries before the birth of Christ. The Romans have not yet even dreamed of empire. It is a dark chapter in the history of the Jews, while Babylon's fierce star is rising. The Bible describes the Babylonian attack. Homes are pillaged, King Solomon's temple is set ablaze and utterly destroyed.
Saddam Hussein made the mistake of comparing himself to Babylon's King Nebuchadnezzar. The capture of Iraq and Saddam Hussein was not just about oil and colonization, it was also about settling an old Hebrew score.
We got him.
On December 13th, the producers of 911 released a new reality TV show called We Got 'Em. The Iraqi people claimed the We Got 'Em video show was staged. Why? Because the video shows ripe, yellow-colored dates growing on a tree to the left of the hole, where Saddam Hussein was supposedly captured. Every Iraqi citizen knows that Iraqi dates only ripen and turn yellow in July and August, never in December. Since date trees don't tell lies, the We Got 'Em video had to be staged at least 3 months earlier in July or August, not on December 13th as reported. How could Saddam, who is almost 70 years old and over 6 feet tall with a bloated belly, squeeze in and out of a hole that small? How could he have grown a beard that long in such a short time? Why did he dye his hair black while in hiding? For his CNN close-ups, perhaps? There are 3 books which clearly map out the Zionist plan for world domination. The Bible, written by Hebrews, Morals and Dogma, written by Freemason Albert Pike, and the Protocols of Zion, written by the Priori of Zion and revised by the Zionist Illuminati. All 3 books describe the plan for an apocalypse or Third World War, which will give birth to one world empire and one world leader. This one world leader is called the Antichrist. The Bible is like a screenplay for a reality disaster movie, but with a fairy tale ending. The Zionist plan is to create an apocalypse that will exhaust and depopulate the masses through deadly designer viruses, global terror, economic disasters, and nuclear war. These disasters are timed to occur between now and 2014, when the remaining survivors will gladly embrace the promises of a handsome, charismatic new leader who will unveil his plan of hope for eternal world peace. The only way to achieve eternal world peace, he will explain, is to put an end to the 5 causes of war. Secretly, he knows there is only one main cause of wars, the wars caused by his royal ancestors who planned, provoked, financed, and profited from them. He will sell his peace plan by telling the world that border wars will only end by creating a world without borders. Religious wars will only end by creating one world religion of interfaiths. Economic wars will only end by creating a cashless, debt-free society. Rivalry wars between rulers will only end by creating one world ruler. The tools used for war, from handguns to nuclear bombs, will be eliminated, and one world army will be created, which will guarantee world peace. How will this eternal peace plan be accomplished? Through the United Nations, which is the brainchild of the Committee of 300 Ruling Families. The UN is their vehicle for world government and is located on 18 acres of prime Manhattan land donated by the most visible of the ruling families, the Rockefellers. The UN is a closed organization with no public records or open meetings. U.S. taxpayers have already invested $2 trillion in this world authority. Although most of the people working for the UN are genuinely working for peace, the UN is a godless organization controlled by the Committee of 300. These inbred ruling families pretend to have royal blue blood, but their blood is no more blue or royal than Hannibal Lecter's blood. Some speculate that these families of evildoers are demons or aliens or evil shape-shifting reptilians, but there is a more scientific explanation for their madness. For thousands of years, these families have practiced inbreeding between sisters and brothers, uncles and nieces, mothers and sons, to keep the power and wealth all in the family. This practice of inbreeding over thousands of years has produced a clever but pathological breed of conscienceless, sociopathic families who will stop at nothing to own every ounce of gold, every drop of water, and every blade of grass on planet Earth. The United Nations, which they founded and control, has clearly stated its goals of establishing a new world order, a UN standing army, and a global taxation system. The Queen's husband, Prince Philip, and Evelyn Rothschild have already established an interfaith declaration for the creation of one world religion. What would life be like in this world empire with one world religion, one world army, one world economy, one world court, one world media, one world government, and one world dictator? What the public doesn't know is that Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto and the Russian Constitution have been built into the UN Charter, and that the New World Order will be a communist world order. Peace on earth will be a forced peace in which citizens will have no rights. No right to bear children without approval, no right to travel without authorization, no right to own private property, no right to privacy, no right to bear arms, no right to protest, no right to receive an inheritance, no right to choose an education or a job or even a place of residence, and worst of all, no right to live. The right to live will be based on an individual's rating of usefulness to the royal elite. In this planned world without borders or nations, citizens will be disarmed of all weapons, including handguns, and will have no means to protest, fight, resist, or challenge this one world authority who will control them spiritually, economically, and militarily. Every human being will be electronically tattooed and will become helplessly dependent on this one world authority for all of their most basic needs. The masses will eventually be taught to bow down and worship this one world dictator who will rule the entire world from his eternal throne in Israel. The big question is, who is this charismatic leader that the entire world would be willing to accept as their ruler? According to plan, this future world ruler will prove himself to be a descendant of Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene, and will therefore be accepted by the Christian world. Some will even view him as the Savior and Messiah. As a professed descendant of Christ and a proponent of world religion, he will also be accepted by Buddhists, Hindus, and the Eastern world, where Jesus Christ reportedly lived, studied, and preached Eastern philosophy. Since he is a descendant of the Hebrew tribes of Israel, he will also be accepted by Hebrews and Jews worldwide. By marrying a Muslim woman, he will win the acceptance of the Muslim world. He will also be accepted by worldwide Freemasonry and secret societies, which he is a member of. As the son of Princess Diana, he is already loved and worshipped. When his mother died in the arms of a Muslim man in a Paris car crash, the world embraced him. On May 31, 2004, the Rothschild-controlled Associated Press published a photograph worldwide taken by Alistair Grant. The photo shows Prince William posing with a lamb like Jesus Christ, who the Bible calls the Lamb of God. What is the significance of this photograph? To the unaware observer, the photograph is perfectly innocent, but to insiders familiar with the protocols of Zion, Freemasonry, and the Book of Revelations, William is identified in the photo as the Antichrist. The Antichrist has been described in art and literature as handsome and charming and a master of lies and deception. Freemasons call him the Baphomet or goat of Mendes. He has also been described as the embodiment of evil and the enemy of God, and has been called Satan, Lucifer, Pan, the Beast, and Amen. He is commonly illustrated with cloven hind hooves. Why is Prince William holding up a cloven hind hoof in the photograph? The question of whether God or Satan even exist has been fiercely debated since the beginning of debates. Some people believe that God and Satan are inventions of the ruling class to control the masses. Most people acknowledge the existence of positive creative energy characterized by joy, love, and vitality, and the existence of negative destructive energy characterized by greed, hatred, and death. The triumph of evil in the world today is based on the ability of evil to disguise itself as its opposite and fool the masses. According to Masonic calculations, Prince William is predicted to be crowned world dictator in the year 2015 at the age of 33. Without organized intervention, life and peace on earth will take on a whole new meaning. How many people would be willing to play a game of Monopoly with real money if the banker was making up the rules, rigging the dice, stealing the money, cheating the players, and grabbing up all the properties? The answer is almost everybody. The truth is that only 1% of the world's population of over 6 billion people is controlling the other 99%. That 1% owns the world's banks and most of the world's wealth, land, and resources. So why is everybody passively cooperating with this madness? Because the wealthy 1% who write the rules have taught the other 99% to obey them and to feel powerless to change things. When people feel powerless, they cling to passive attitudes like ignorance is bliss, things aren't that bad, or let God take care of everything. Before choosing a passive attitude, remember that the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing. Despite all the red flags, many people deny that a problem even exists. It does exist, and the good news is there are solutions. The solutions lie in knowing what the three biggest fears of the world's ruling families are. The first biggest fear is exposure. They have gone to great lengths to cover up their trail of crimes and to win the public's trust through their media monopolies. Without public trust, their ancestral plan for global control is doomed. Their second biggest fear is losing public support. If the public stops cooperating, their plan is guaranteed to fail. Their third biggest nightmare is organized resistance by an informed and fearless public. The ruling families know from past experience that the will of the people can defeat all their military and monetary might. Vietnam is a perfect example. There is no doubt whatsoever that these ruling families can be totally defeated by turning their three worst fears into a reality. Solution number one is exposing the ruling families and their generations of horrific crimes against humanity. The most powerful form of advertising is word of mouth. Share information, talk about it, name names, recommend books, videos and websites, form your own study group and solutions group, design a web page, show videos, films, and DVDs. Raise money, give money, organize, lobby, email, and do whatever you can to stop the madness. Millions of people around the world who protested the invasion of Iraq learned a hard lesson. They learned that peaceful protests don't work. Since the Committee of 300 Families created think tanks to mastermind a plan for global control, citizens must also create think tanks to mastermind a plan to stop them. Learn who the past and present members of the Committee of 300 are. At the top of the list are the royal families of Britain and Denmark, the international banking families, and the affiliated political families. Find time to research and read about the Committee of 300. Dig beneath the hype and propaganda, connect the dots, and share your information. The second solution for ending the madness is to take back control over your own money. Right now, your money is in the hands of the ruling families who own all of the world's banks, including the privatized central banks. How did they get to be so powerful? It started with the very first banks. In the beginning, banks were a safe place for people to store their gold. When the bankers discovered that people left most of their gold in the bank for safekeeping, they started lending out the gold that didn't belong to them and charging interest on it. Soon, kings and royalty were borrowing gold from the bankers to finance wars. Since wars were extremely good for business, the bankers started stirring up conflicts that led to more wars. Then they lent money out to both sides of the wars and collected huge interest rates. Eventually, the bankers got so rich that they built banks all over the world. They made millions in interest just by loaning out other people's money that didn't belong to them. They bought mansions and fancy clothes and hosted extravagant parties. The royal families of Europe became the banksters' biggest customers and rewarded them with high society titles like Lord and Baron and Sir. Using their money and royal influence, the banksters changed the laws of nations so they could put the world's central banks, mints, and money supply into private hands, their private hands. Out of every $1,000 that each of their customers deposited in their banks, they kept only $100 on hand. They took the rest of their customers' money and made loans with it, invested it, and started up other businesses, like the steel business to create rails for their railway companies, to transport oil for their oil companies. Pretty soon, the banksters' new businesses grew into giant corporations. Those giant corporations turned the world's oceans, lakes, rivers, air, and soil into corporate toilets. When profits from all their oil, mining, and drug company monopolies soared, the banksters became the world's richest men, but their greed had no limits. They wanted to own the entire world, so they put their heads together and came up with an ingenious scheme to take control of all of the world's money and riches. Whoever owns all of the world's money, they said, owns the world.